Okay,
All
fine.
right.
Yeah. Do the thing. Action.
Welcome. This is a software update podcast.
Software update. Yeah.
My name is Josh Allen. This is Jeremy Benson. This is our season finale of.
Season is a strong word. But yes, this is the season finale.
Why is season a strong word?
Did we start this like 6 months ago?
It's like a baseball season.
Yeah. Well said, sir.
You know what I mean? It's baseball season. There's a lot of games.
I rock with that. Definitely a lot of games.
A lot of games.
Playing
A lot of
games.
games.
So what's up? What were you up to today before this? You had a DJ set.
I did a DJ set.
And what you were talking to sorry, I cut you off. At where? Don't remember. It's great.
You said talk?
No. Where did you have your DJ set at?
Oh, it was at this spot off of Milam Street
Mm-hmm.
in Midtown.
It's a coffee spot, right?
No, it's an actual club.
Oh, it's a club. Okay.
And the owner is wanting to do coffee Sundays.
Got
it was a
you.
vibe. Like,
Yeah.
I'd rather do that. I'd rather DJ in the morning and the afternoon than at night.
Yeah. Which I feel like is a nice software update to kind of ease us into things, because you were just talking to Mason about how daytime activities are really the new wave.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Talk about that.
You talk about that.
I don't do daytime things. I'm in my house, bro.
Well, okay, so I believe that yes, it is fun to. Well, it just depends on your occupation too. So if you work during the day,
Mm-hmm.
the only option is to do things at night. But I don't know. I think it's more so for people who are like unemployed.
But that's not true, because this is a weekend. Like, I mean, I think
I would
like-
say okay. I would say like unemployed. All right. Well, not unemployed, but people who just have different schedules, and maybe they would rather do something during the day so they can go to bed at night and be at work for the next day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's like the most like straightforward like idea that I would have about why people like daytime events. You get
Yeah.
to do stuff during the day, be able to go to sleep and wake up.
Yeah.
And get back to it.
And we were kind of talking about this with like spaces that can kind of transform. Remember,
Mhm.
like, I feel like the whole idea of GAR is kind of that, where it's a space that can evolve throughout the day and on different days.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And like, so you had that live painting session at Tadaima, right?
Taridima.
Tadaima, yeah. Say
Yeah.
it again. Say it again.
I can't. I'm not gonna say that again.
Replay that if you want the correct pronunciation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that space was really dope, and I feel as though that is an example of the sort of third space that we're into, where it's a retail store, but it's also kind of conceptual in that you were, occupying it as if it was your art studio.
Mm-hmm.
People were pulling up. I pulled up to like support, but then also, bought some candles because they have fire candles there.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a thread of the owners. What's the owner's name again? Is it Ezla?
Yes.
Ezla, yeah, he was super cool. And the other dude, I didn't get to meet him. What was his name?
Christian.
Christian, yeah.
Shout out to Christian.
They were
and
both
Ezra.
super dope and like, super welcoming and warm.
And Misa.
And they also like display their own artwork there, which is super fire. And it's interesting because, and then there was the show that Moth had here before. The guy who put the show on, what was his name?
Yes.
Brick, who had, I guess, never been to Houston or never seen this part of Houston, but you'd mentioned, or Mason had mentioned, that he was like impressed, pleasantly impressed, which I think leads us into the whole Paris, Texas, the concept that while Houston has a lot to offer, potentially it's a branding issue that Houston is having. And yeah, I wanted to get into that. Like, how do we, wrapping up this season, the things we've discussed, our journeys, our relationships to Houston, your story about how the Pompidou connects to the Manil, the fashion component, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'll let you decide where we enter the story, but I feel like that story is an interesting one to kind of connect the dots for people in a way that if they don't already know what Houston has to offer.
So I'm just like going through my notes of what we talked about. So as it goes back to the why.
The why, yes.
The why. Why do I design the way that I do? Why do I paint the way that I do? How am I seeing these different components of inspiration that I'm taking from these things that I mentioned before, including architecture, including music, and all of that? And how do I put them in one world and explore that world through output, through experiences, through product, and almost taking the places that I had the blessing and opportunity to experience going overseas, and taking these specific experiences and creating worlds inspired by those experiences. Paris and Tokyo have been two places where I find myself having the most inspiration by visiting there, and also just learning fashion history. So there was a moment when, like in '89, Versace was at its like highest, like it was like, you know, the best brand out, and not to butcher her name, sorry guys, Ri Kawabu, Ri Karakabu. I'm sorry if I'm butchering her name.
Ray Kawakubo?
Yes. Owner of Comme des Garçons. Her and Yohei Yamamoto were friends, and Yohei Yamamoto told Ray, like, I'm gonna go to Japan. They both living in Japan. And he was like, I'm gonna go to Paris and show my stuff. And she goes, no, we shouldn't like share our stuff to those people, or to like the French. And he was like, okay, I'm not gonna go. And so he ended up going anyway. And then when he saw his fashion line on the schedule, he saw Comme des Garçons.
Wait, so they were trying to gatekeep each other?
Basically, it ended up showing collections that were like very identical, and it was like the moment of like two Japanese designers putting all black on a runway. So it was super colorful during that year. Mm-hmm. It was like real poppy and shit. And then you had like this like all black presence.
Okay.
You know, from two Japanese designers. And in my opinion, I think that was almost like the birth of Margiela, because Margiela came through with the all white, you know. Then we have like Jill Sounder. Then we have like Helmut Lang. Then we have Rick Owens. Then we have like this moment when you just put all black, just like down the runway, and it have like a presence. And it's.
So now, correct me if I'm wrong, but like I've seen, I'm sure like many other people, Dior and I.
Yes.
When
Raph Simmons was the creative director for Dior.
Yeah. Wasn't he doing a lot of tonal things, or even just Dior as a brand? Were they not doing tonal things prior to? What year was this that the Comme des Garçons Yoji show was?
This was in '89.
'89. Okay, so prior to '89, are you positing that brands, at least for the most part, the ones that were like at the top setting the tone,
they were doing
weren't
like
as interested in like the all black silhouette only?
No. Yeah,
okay.
It was like super colorful. It was like that poppy 80s.
I see.
You know, It was the 80s. It was really poppy.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
It was like the end of the 80s. And then I think there was some sort of economical recession too.
Yeah.
So
the 80s into the 90s.
80s into the 90s. So kind of going back to Paris, Texas, it's, in my opinion, being able to deliver experiences based off fashion history, based off architect history, based off what's going on right here culturally in this moment. And for me, it's creating a pipeline where I'm able to create experiences here, but just literally go straight to Paris and then go straight to Tokyo or any places. Like, no, not even just Paris. I want to go to France. Just want to explore activating my brand, representing Texas, but in my way. And so a little bit of what we were touching based on is like Houston having a rebranding problem. So how we even realized that is that we went on that bike ride. We were at the Buffalo Bayou, and we saw that building.
Oh yeah, the one on, I always forget. It's like Maine. It's like I know what you're talking about. A roaded building on Buffalo Bayou. I had it pulled up and then I closed my tabs. This is why I never close my tabs, guys. Never close your tabs. Always keep them open forever. I know what you're talking about. I'm gonna remember the name. I'll get it.
That's been like the whole thing about.
And just for context, this building in question is so like from the street, it looks like a traditional brick building, and then on the back side, it looks a little like like the back half of the building like fell off.
Yes.
Basically, like it looks like an eroded, kind of like intentionally deconstructed building with like glass and red painted steel wall that like is super curvy, and so it has this really interesting reading, and it has a certain like punchiness, and it stands out relative to other buildings around it.
Yes.
Carry on.
And as a Houston native, there are languages of Houston that we just sort of bypass. And for me, it's sort of like beaming a light on these specific things that make the city, or what I've been inspired by the city that I take into my work and like mix that and turn it into an output. So it's not just me just making monochromatic shit because that's what's hot right now, or it's like almost the easy way to do. I'm doing it because it's like a rebranding approach. Can I approach art, approach fashion from a monochromatic lens and still represent not just Houston but Texas, which is why that Texas tea is gonna.
It's called the Dixon Building.
It's called. Oh, really?
It used to be. It was a former Dixon Packing Company, damaged by a flood.
And for the record, Jeremy said that Houston has a rebranding problem. I didn't say that. I've known that, but you know he's not from here. So
I'm not from here, so I guess that's
it's
important.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Bit of context, right? So like, I'm not from Houston. I am from the South, though,
which is important.
Yeah, I was born in Tennessee, so like I'm not coming here with a purely like capital O outsider, you know what I mean? Like I understand like Southern culture to some extent, but I've also lived in a lot of big cities, and it's interesting that, you know, when you look at the statistics, like Houston is I think we're fourth largest city, you know, after Chicago, LA, and New York, and those three cities have kind of a brand to it, right? Like you kind of know what you're signing up for. You know, you get like the Chicago summertime, right? Summertime shy. And then, you know, during the winter, you get super cold, like, ugh, don't go there.
Right.
In New York, you get a sort of like anything can happen. There's a million stories, you know, occurring simultaneously. LA, you have a bit of like the glitz and the glamour of whether it's, you know, entertainment, being a content creator, all of these things, movie production. There's a certain like weather that you expect of these places, right? and there's a certain thing you expect of the people as well. That's another thing, right? Like in New York, you kind of expect to get cursed out by
Yes.
some dude on the street just because that's like New York for you. LA, were we talking about this? There's something called like the Hollywood Yes, which is like I don't know if I'm making this up.
Yeah.
Did
like,
we talk about this?
I think so. Like you were saying something like people, like you go out and it's like yes.
Yeah. Like,
and then when you fall,
let's totally do that.
Yeah.
Or like you take a meeting
and then like
and you have an idea and they're like, oh my God, that sounds great. And then
Yes.
like we'll follow up. And then
follow up. Never follow up. Terrible.
You know what I mean? So like there's a certain thing you get. And so all of this is to say.
Well, I think we have great. So here's why GAW is going to be so impactful, in my opinion, is that we have Southern hospitality here. That's what people have always said about Houstonians or Texans, is that we have Southern hospitality. Like,
but there's a flavor to it though. There's a certain flavor to the Southern hospitality because
okay, go ahead.
I find I'm curious to hear what you think. But when I think Southern hospitality, I'm thinking like Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi probably. Although to be fair, I've been to Mississippi one time and I was scared to go back. So
fair.
But I feel like Texas has more of like a live and let live mentality, which is kind of Southern hospitality adjacent, in my opinion. Like what I really appreciate about Houston is you're gonna find people who you disagree with. I mean, there are people with like, you know, different flags and things that they support that may be fundamentally incongruous with your own. But there's a certain ability to see beyond that. Like you can be a person who has an opinion that one disagrees with, but you're not only that, right? Like you're more than that. You might also be their neighbor. You may also be their coworker. And so there's a certain like ability to say like, look, man, if you let me do my thing, I'll let you do your thing.
Yeah.
And don't let me be an apologist for Texas, because the politics here can be wicked and like women are
anything that we're
time.
talking about as far as in like this conversation has nothing to do with politics. Because
I fully recognize it. Like I'm in a luxury position. We are in luxurious positions to be men in a state that is like trying to take away women's rights. But like that's a whole other thing. I'm just saying that
totally
outside of that, there
record
is something to be said about like, you know, there people just kind of like, okay, cool, like that's what you're on, all right, bet, you know. And that kind of like lends itself to like that diversity we were talking about when we went. I forgot where it was, Melrose, I think. And just like the diversity of the sorts of people that we see out and about, right? Like it's very common for us to go to a place and see all, like we went to the Manil opening. That's when we were talking about it. We went to the Manil opening, and like if that opening at a highly regarded museum was to occur in like a LA or Chicago or New York, at least in my opinion, I feel like there would be a more homogenous tone or like characteristic to that group of people, right? Like they all might be from like one particular scene or a handful of scenes, and they may already have like known each other, and it would have just felt like, oh, I'm either cool enough to go here, I'm not cool enough to go here. And what I like about Houston is you'll have really interesting, you know, high profile things like an opening at the Manil, and it's very welcoming and inviting and accessible, and you don't get these striations that is like, oh, only one sort of class of people is here, or only one demographic of, you know, race or, you know, industry or whatever. You get like a little bit of everything. Like you get young people, you get older people, you get men, you get women, you get, you know, like it's literally like the diversity in practice versus just like, oh, we have a lot of numbers represented. It's like the events and the things that we go out to. Houston has a good job of like having something for everybody. I feel like you see it at the rodeo too, right? Like you see a little bit of everything. And all to say that it's like, man, imagine if more people, let me back up. Being from the South is interesting because when you go to school outside of the South, people basically have one of two opinions. Either they're like, ew, I hate the South because of slavery.
Yeah.
I'm never going there. Fuck the South. Or you have, I used to go to the South in the summer. It was super slow and hot. I hate the South. Fuck the South. So you basically end up in the same place. I mean, or like my favorite one. So being from Tennessee, right? And I feel like Texans can relate to this. Like, you know, when you meet somebody who's like, oh yeah, like I've been to Texas before, and like, where'd you go? And in your head, you're like, Austin. And then they say Austin, and you're like, you didn't really see Texas. I feel that way about people who go to Tennessee and only go to Nashville.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because it's the most well-branded part of Tennessee, right? Arguably, Austin is the most well-branded part of. I mean, every state has like their
That's
like.
way to bring it back to the branding.
You know what I'm saying though? It's
great.
like I feel like every state kind of has like its like thing that they, you know, that their travel, or what is it, the tourist agency is like pushing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when I think about Houston versus Austin, like the authentic part of me, like the part that appreciates good food, good art, like people who are real, really defaults to like, oh, I prefer Houston for that reason. And I really do feel like Houston is one of the most authentic places I've lived in, as far as people just keep it real. So yeah, it's really interesting to think about those things and like, what would it mean for Houston to really like have a brand outside of just Texas as like, hey, here's this like pretty interesting, wealthy, like decently forward thinking, you know, corner of the South that like has a lot of art, you know, like to me, the art scene of Houston can stand up to like a Chicago. It doesn't have necessarily maybe like the scale of institutional support as in New York, but in terms of like the artists that come here,
yes,
to me it's on par. Like,
yep.
I can go to Cam, MFA, Manil. I mean, the Manil alone, like within that block, you got the Cy Twombly, you got the Dan Flavin, you have the Drawing Institute, you have the Rothko Chapel. It's like, bruh,
Yeah.
how are people who are super into these things, art, culture, food, all the things, like not getting the memo, right? And it has to be a function of two things. One, Houston doesn't really care to brand, right? Because I think there's a version of authenticity which like goes so far to the point where you're like, I actually don't care if people know that I'm lit or not, or if people know that I got X, Y, or Z to offer, right?
Yes.
And it's like the people here are kind of like that too. They're like, I'm not really worried if people know to pull up or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But part of me, you know, what I think what metropolitan places offer, it's my last point, and I'm gonna turn it over to you.
No, you're cooking.
What metropolitan places offer is like an increase in the likelihood, statistically speaking, that you'll run into somebody else with like a differing opinion, idea, etc. And by you interacting with that person, interesting creative sparks occur, right? Like that's why it's interesting to go to live in a place like a New York, because it has so much draw. So many different people come to the place, and then as a function of that, you get all these like wild ideas. And then if you have the infrastructure to support it, whether it's financially, creatively, or otherwise, then you get all the things that you get in New York. You get a Broadway, you get a, you know what I mean, music industry, you get a fashion industry, like all of these things, right? And like to me, what I find that you and Lou are doing that's really interesting. So Lou of Petra Stellum with Kay, like we were talking when we visited the studio, and he has like interns from, I forgot the school, local school that he went to. Yeah.
University of Houston, yeah.
And so he'll like invite people from there, because when he went, he was like, I didn't have that. The only people who came from our program doing fashion were doing like gowns, or were doing, you know, like just things that weren't necessarily in the same vein of, if you go to fashion school in New York, or, you know what I mean, like in London or Paris, wherever, like your aim is to be on the runway at New York Fashion Week,
yep,
or Paris Fashion Week, and he wasn't seeing that pipeline to like aesthetically, how do we become part of that same conversation? Do you know what I mean? And I find it really cool for him to say, okay, I'm going to uplift this place that I'm coming from, and really like position the ideas that we have, and try to create a pipeline where it's like, hey, look, if you can come, learn about design alongside me, right? Like as he's pulling references, like, you know, he had on loop the Balenciaga runways. Like he's just like, yeah, I like the music. And he was telling me about his process for how he got the music for his last fashion show. So there's like a richness and a clear desire for like the rigor of like a capital F fashion brand, right? Like a fashion label. And he's a young dude. I feel like you're on the same wave. It's like, how do you take these references, these things that you're seeing, but through the lens of Texas, and not simply say, oh, I want to go to Paris because that's how I get lit, but it's more like I want to offer my opinion in the realm of other people offering their opinion, and then them saying like, oh wait, you mean there's a brand from Houston at this level? Do you know what I mean? Like at this creative, you know what I mean? Like, oh, you had the chance to be in New York and you decided to stay in Houston. Tell me more about that. You know what I mean? And so I think it's like, you know, we would talk about it in grad school, how, and I think I mentioned it here before, you know, you go to school, you get these skills, and then people tend to like go to the same places that have a bunch of other people like you already, which is like kind of antithetical to the whole premise of value, right? Because value is about like, all right, if you have like, if you're the only person who can like build houses in a city or in a town, like everybody need a house, you're going to be straight, right? If you go to another town and there's 10 people who can build a house, like you might have a tough time, because what's going to separate them from choosing you to build their house versus the other 9 people, right? It might just come down to price, and that's where you get the concept of race to the bottom. So all of this is to say, there was something interesting that when talking to my my classmates about this after grad school, was like, how interesting would it be to take the skills we've learned from like this institution and bring them to places that don't typically have this level of like creative investment. You know what I mean? And so in many ways, Houston kind of represents that for me. It's like, not only is it a place that doesn't on the outside have a lot of institutional or creative investment, but when you sit with it and you realize like, oh, wait a minute, there is already stuff here. It just maybe doesn't have the same like pipelines, the same connections, the same support institutionally and otherwise. And so it's really cool that my boss, for example, he is like a supporter of the Manil and the CAM, and so there is kind of this idea that he understands as well, that like, hey, if we uplift and try to invest in these places, we can get to, if we are not already, but we can get people to realize that, okay, hey, we can be in that conversation creatively. And then that will invite more people to, at the very least, like pop by, do a show here, give people opportunities to, in the future, come to a place like GAR and realize like, oh, wow, like there's so much happening. You guys are, you know what I mean? You guys are really helping it. And it's like, we're just trying to do the things that we would want, or that we saw the people who came before us do for us. You know what I mean? We're trying to do that for the next.
It's so interesting, because I think like all major cities kind of go through this episode where people like when there's, I don't like saying transplants. We got to find a different word for transplants. I said settlers one time. And you were like, we can't do settlers. But
settlers ain't gonna work for me, cuz.
Yeah, right.
Settlers.
Because I believe that when people move into a city and they're looking for something new, they're either going to experience what that local community is providing, or they're going to create something with locals or by themselves, because it's almost like, oh, this feels like a blank canvas for me. It's almost how most people move to New York or move to LA to pursue creative dreams. I think people are moving to Texas to pursue creative lifestyle dreams, where being a creative allows them a lifestyle that in the same amount of time or effort they would put into a job, they can be creative in these sort of like.
Do you also feel, as interesting, do you also feel as though maybe people think of a place like Houston as being a bit of like a blank slate, that like, oh, there, to my point, right? Like, oh, there's less competition here. I'm gonna pull up here, and even if my idea isn't strong enough to take off into New York, maybe at the very least it'll be strong enough to take off in a place like Houston because there's not as much creative competition. Like,
Totally.
do you think that that's a part of it?
Totally.
And with that, does it feel like, going back to the genuine kind of authenticity part, does it feel like that's an easy thing to kind of identify and be like, and for people to be like, oh, I can see through what you're doing, and therefore, like, I'm not really interested in.
I think it just depends
that.
on the consumer of whatever product that's being sold.
Mm-hmm.
Either that is a T-shirt, a painting, an art experience, a DJ set.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's what, after like living in New York, and I would hear New Yorkers say, "Man, I hate when transplants come through and they fuck shit up." And you hear the same shit in LA. Like, I hate when people come to LA and they, you know, blah, 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 blah. Like, you know, people want to film movies in front of people's houses because they just trying to get that shot or whatever. So, I don't know. It's interesting to see people move here because it's for a different reason. But for me, as a native, it just makes me want to turn my shit up.
So you see it as like a productive resistance.
The fucking facts.
Okay.
And I think what's frustrating sometimes is that I can see that shit clear as day.
Okay.
That there is a cultural renaissance happening here in Texas.
Yes.
And it's either we create product from a local level that exists at a high standard. And when I say high standard, I'm going back to a creative corporate collaborative standard.
Okay.
So, for example, my running club.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a 1 to 2 man show with Richard and Grace, and I was able to manage to get an official running club, which is coming back next month.
In collaboration with
Hoka.
With Hoka. And
it's communicating your brand at a minor level, because there's so much more communication to Richard and Grace that I'm still in that process of doing. But I was able to communicate the brand enough to work with Hoka and still work with them. So there needs to be like 20 different brands like that here in Houston.
Right. And right now it's like we have
I don't even want to name them off.
We got Petrostellum.
That's it. As far as in like in my hemisphere, maybe there are other brands, because I don't want to be on some messy shit. Maybe there are other brands that have, but in my hemisphere of what I'm focused on to get us to that level is Richard and Grace and Petrostellum. That's it. As far as in any other fashion brands, they may have different goals or different dreams, which is okay.
Yeah, because the competition
but to
part,
kind of
right?
like, yes, because even that whole competition thing,
but like friendly like the premise that like you can't have like having like the one brand who's like aiming to do the thing is cool, but you get a lot. It's like the steel sharpens steel thing. Like, you really get the strongest ideas whenever there are multiple people proposing versions of those strong ideas, and you're like, oh, well, in order to keep up, in order to like really push things, I got to be able to sit in that same conversation, right? So no, there's totally something there to,
and I think that's why I'm so excited about Gar, because people, I mean, that question sometimes comes up here and there, like, who are the best fashion designers in Houston, or who are the best fashion designers in New York or LA? For me personally, I have to on purpose not give a fuck, because I used to care about that kind of shit so much. And comparison is a thief of joy. Comparison is the thief of joy. And I would take me trying to compare myself to what somebody else has going on has taken away the joy of the ready-to-wear clothing portion of Richard and Grace. And when I stopped comparing, I've been having so much fun again.
Yes.
Like, I'm never been excited to like drop a T-shirt, drop a button up, drop a hat, and drop some socks. Because in my personal journey, that's what I know I have to do in order to get to the next thing. Even though I've accomplished all these other things before.
Yes.
But it's about moving forward. So, I mean, there's a lot of great designers here in Houston. There's been a a spike in people understanding what good graphic design, what clothing design, but for God, it's more about the experience. And this is the software update that this is gonna kind of be like the battles of like the battles of local retail, which is GA. Like it's allows, so whenever we just kind of like kind of go over like what is GA. So whenever me and Petrostellum had our exhibition here at Moth, the opening was great. We had sort of like pop-up hours during the week, and it hit me that like, oh shit, me and Luke could be still working on something while this setup is set up. Like while everything is still set up. So that's when I started thinking like, damn, the inspiration for this installation was Dover Street Market. What if I created a space where there's a Dover Street Market, but on the other side of the space, it's like the studio.
Now, I'm pause you there because this is a good moment for us to connect the dot all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, right? Because Dover Street Market is the instantiation of whose brand, who's the person behind.
Comme des Garçons.
Okay, so in the same way that Comme des Garçons has a vision for, okay, here's my brand, here's the things I want to be doing. I want to be on the runway. I want to do ready to wear. They also have a vision for, this is the way I want to present my pieces, my wearable sculpture, my wearable art.
Yes.
I've actually never been to Dover Street Market. Tell us about Dover Street Market so people have context.
Dover Street
Explain
Market.
like I'm 5.
So CDG has damn near 7 different brands. There's Comme des Garçons, Comme des Garçons shirt, Comme des Garçons black, Junior Watanabe, Comme des Garçons play.
Right. And so let's also, for maybe somebody who's not going to look this up, be like, what's like, have I seen it?
So
what does it look like?
So if you've seen a shirt that has the heart with 2 eyes,
yes,
that's Comme des Garçons play.
And the shoes, right?
And the shoes and the chucks.
Yeah, the chucks.
Ray Kawakubo,
yeah.
Her husband came up with Comme des Garçons play so it could fund everything. And she hates that. She hates
that he was right.
She fucking hates that fucking Comme des Garçons play shit. But it funds everything.
Wait, she doesn't like it.
She doesn't like it. But
does it feel like it's like a bastardization or something of her brand?
I mean, she makes fucking art.
Yeah.
But he's just like, okay, this has to fund everything. So Dover Street Market is a store that houses all the Comme des Garçons brands, and they have a partnership with Nike. So there's like a little bit of a Nike boutique in there as well.
Oh, sick. Okay.
But they also have other brands like Rick Owens, Margiela, Supreme, Joe Sander. They have Undercover.
Oh, sick.
They have
okay.
Jaquemes. They have Tom Brown.
Okay.
Like they have
the heavy hitters.
But what I like about Dover Street Market is that like there could be like an upcoming brand that they will have in their store, and that would be sold for commission.
Okay.
And if you are a bigger brand like Gucci or Supreme or Margiela, you pay a booth fee. So
interesting.
So it's almost as if both. You see what's going on? Like
it's the Dover Street is both a store and a platform in a way.
Oh my God! Like fuck any other store in the world. If I'm at Dover Street Market and my shit is sold in the same place as Margiela, I'm winning. I'm sorry. Like
yeah.
Or if it's sold in the same place as like museum like pieces,
yeah.
and also too a lot of what came about with Richard and Grace of wanting the painting component is when I would go in Dover Street Market and I would see all this fucking visual merchandising, which would look like an installation, look like art, and feel like art.
Yes.
But then I would think about, damn, what's gonna happen when they transition to the next season? Are they gonna throw this shit away? And 9 times out of 10, they are. So that's when I was thinking, like, damn, what if I were at Dover Street Market, my visual merchandising is my paintings.
Yes.
And that can be either auctioned off, sold, given for charity. You know what I mean? Stuff like that.
Yeah. So there's like a certain cycle to the thing. Because, you know, it's interesting with with what you commented about Ray having a dislike for the Play brand, right? For that diffusion line. It's interesting because really, like, back to the conversation from the last episode when we're talking about
right versus being right versus reasonable.
Like
right,
the
exactly.
Concept of selling out, where it's like we live in capitalism. So
absolutely.
As much as we maybe want to believe in like the purity of the art and this person didn't have to do this and da-da-da, it's like cool, but it's reasonable to say, hey, let's get this brand that is maybe lower commitment than, like, you know, the mainline CDG stuff. People can wear it, become familiar, develop like a relationship to the brand, and it can help be the thing that is funding the bigger, crazier ideas that, like art, may or may not sell.
Right.
You know, but you still get to express, because I think that's the part about fashion. Sometimes it gets lost, or it's like people are like, oh, this is so silly, why would you make, who would wear this? It's always from that perspective. It's like, who would buy this, who would wear this?
I mean,
it's
dude,
like,
I've been showing people the shirt and the button up. Some people are like, oh my god, when? Other people are like, damn, you really gonna go that low as far as in like the quality of like, I thought you want to like be like design like clothes. And then I had other people say like, oh, like, why are you doing this? And my answer is, oh, so I can like fund things, fund my projects. And it kind of just, it's so funny how it goes way over their head, because they're just like, you need to be making like more cut and sew pieces and trying to sell them. And it's like, bro, I've been doing that for the past 7 years. That's why I'm making a fucking t-shirt right now.
Yeah. So, okay, this is an aside, but I feel like it's related to the conversation. So, when we were at Lou and Kay's studio, they have like these 2 racks, right? And he was showing me, he was like, yeah, he was pointing to the one rack by the left wall. He's like, yeah, this is the rack that is like, you know, for people who like want to like look at pieces and stuff, like want to like stuff that we may give to like somebody having a photo shoot or whatever, like styling and stuff like that. And I think the other one was for like archive or vice versa, whatever. But he was pointing to one of them, and he was like, you know, you see the way these clothes sit? They're really flat. And I want to get to the level where my clothes, instead of being able to fit like 12 items on the rack, I want to be able to fit like 3, because they're so sculptural. And bro, that blew my mind, because I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, damn, that is spoken by somebody who is looking at clothing not merely as this like utilitarian object that like protects you from the elements and all the things. He's like, no. He's interested in, how do I get the skill to take something that exists first as like a flat piece of fabric, create a pattern, and structure it in such a way that it starts to occupy a volume. It starts to occupy like 3-dimensional space.
That's what I enjoy about Tom Brown's work. And I said this before in the same thread about Comme des Garçons Play. Tom Brown has like $1,000 sweatsuits so he can fund all those 3-dimensional ass clothes that he be putting down the runway. He's a big volume, big shape person. And
it's to the point about somebody who might see that, who maybe doesn't quote unquote get it. Like, I would say I don't get fashion in the same way that like you get it, right? I would call myself maybe like an amateur, right? In terms of, I can appreciate it, but I don't know all the things. But somebody maybe with as much or less like interest in fashion may look at those things and be like, why would you waste your money on making, buying, selling that? Like, why waste energy and effort on that thing? And like, what maybe people don't get about creative outlets is that like, it has no, like, sometimes you just need to get the creative energy out. You know what I mean? Like,
and also build a world where, like, look, like, I'm blessed that I've made so much other product other than these basic items because
That
it kind
exists, real quick, that exists in an archive that
Yes.
is currently on sale at
Tadema.
Tadema.
But
Shameless plug.
because you need both.
Yeah.
You need that T-shirt and then that other sculptural piece because right now in like not only in culture but selling ceremony, the way the economy works, no one needs either or. Like you don't need a fucking couture dress, and you also don't need another T-shirt. But it's the way that you're able to display the world where if you have two things together or these components together, it allows for these different objects or these different things to be received. And so that's the plans for God, is to have a space where if you are in Houston, you have to come check us out knowing that there's going to be something new as far as an installation, minor level commitment products, kind of going back to the Dover Street Market situation where if fall, winter is available on sale, we're working on spring, summer. And then when spring, summer goes on sale, we're working on fall, winter. So, and it also gives the local, or it gives the person who isn't from here, it gives them a place to experience Houston in a different way. And it allows them to experience Texas in a different way. And it's almost like going to a Dover Street Market, but it's local and it's just forward moving.
Yeah.
And that's why I like that shirt that I'm putting out for Texas. It's like kind of almost been inspired by this conversation. It's like not just having a shirt that says Houston or just Austin or San Antonio. It's just like straight up Texas.
Right. Because, I mean, Texas is in many ways like offering up kind of its own version of how to do things creatively.
It's becoming its own California.
Yeah. Because, okay, did you see, did you send this to me or did I send this to you? It was like an advertisement by a bunch of, it was like related to the film industry. And I think it was
like Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, bro. They're trying to bring the film industry here to Texas.
And like it's so interesting because to your point, when you said that it's becoming like California, it's like it really, like when you think about the size of the place, the diversity of the place, both in terms of people, but also like ecology, right? Like you go 8 hours that way west and you get to Marfa, which is like a completely different vibe. Than what we are. I mean, we're basically swamp.
Yeah.
You know, even to speak to that, right? That the fact that Donald Judd, we talk about him a lot on this podcast. I'm not sorry. Donald Judd, who was in the world, he was in New York, you know, in the art scene.
Yep.
And through funding from DIA, which for those who don't know, the DIA Foundation, one of the founders is a child of the Manils. So they keep it in the family. And DIA also funded the Terrell volcano and I think the Walter D. Maria lightning field. Leave a comment if I'm wrong. But all to say that like he was in New York, he was kind of like, look, I'm tired of this. Went out to a place in Marfa, effectively created what it is now, right? Like Marfa is basically just a city that was responding to Judd's desire for making work out there, and it's just kind of like, oh, I need people to be here and help me with, you know what I mean? So it just kind of like, I mean, he has half a dozen buildings, if not more, and so it's just interesting to think about that. Like, okay, somebody who's highly regarded in the art world, for example, what would cause them, and what, like, maybe think about what he was seeing in Texas for him to say, hey, New York ain't it, even though New York was it in many ways,
right.
and still is it.
Right.
There's clearly something about this place that is able to like attract and inspire, because arguably his work really started popping off once he gets here, right? once Judd gets here, he has Chinati. I mean, he starts like getting into the architecture, starts getting into the concept that, you know, differently than a museum where the work is going to rotate, maybe instead we have these spaces that permanently show the work of me and my friends, right? So you can go and see like entire installations that are permanent of Dan Flavin. Yeah, so that's an interesting thing to think through, is that like, what would it look like? And I arguably, like, this podcast, this conversation that we have, it's more conversational. It's less like podcast advertisements, all the things. But the whole premise of this pod was us saying, hey, we have a creative outlet. We're seeing these things. We're having these interesting conversations amongst ourselves just as we hang out. How do we not only document it for ourselves, but document it for others? And then it also kind of serves as a document to the richness of a place like Houston, right? Because if this setup, right, Moth, our ability to record, you know, Sundays at a beautiful space with cool people, and a really vibrant creative community. If that was occurring in like a New York or an LA or Chicago, that's not that interesting, because that happens all the time there. Do you know what I mean? Because it's not weird, or it's not like out of the ordinary for that to be supported. And I'm sure there's like 10 podcast studios that have this aesthetic and have a vibrant community around them. And it's more the fact that like a place like Moth exists here, and, you know, places like Ball Kitty exist here and have the same energy with the same level of authenticity and the same level of attracting interesting people and having interesting conversations. And yet people like are slow to find out about them, or outright don't even think to see if they exist, because they just assume that they know what a Houston is, because, oh, it's like all the others, you know what I mean? It's like, oh yeah, it's whatever. So part of this is like, how do we, you know, we're doing our little drop in the bucket of, hopefully you can see this pod and see season 1 is like, hey, here's these guys who, as creative people in the city, are being inspired by the city, are wanting to inspire others in the city, just highlight the fact that creative conversations are happening. And then, you know, hopefully in season 2, we continue those conversations with some of those people that are inspiring us, you know what I mean? With some of those people who, you know, are maybe from here or have moved here and are now working here and integrated into this community, and like, you know, just offering that different lens and like giving their voices a platform and putting more eyes and ears on them, such that in the same way that the New Yorks and the LAs and the Chicagos do a great job of like uplifting their people, it's like we're trying to do the same thing for our people. You know what I'm saying?
Software update, man.
Software update.
Great season, bro.